brought to you by Youth Capital. Yes or no? This is in the run-up to the 2024 general elections. We're having a look at youth issues with a specific reference to the Youth Employment Service in the hopes that it will be continued by the South African government once South Africa decides who will lead it post the 2024 elections. Today, we are going to be talking about spatial inequality. It is a lasting legacy that was bequeathed to us by apartheid, and we're joined by some panelists vying for your votes. Once again, we've got the so-called Big Three, the ANC, alongside the DA, as well as the Economic Freedom Fighters. They're joined with the IFP, Inkatha Freedom Party, as well as the Pan-African Congress rather, and an independent candidate in the form of Zaki Ahmed. We are going to be getting a lay of the land with none other than Professor Edgar Pieterse. He's going to be talking to us about spatial inequality and its legacy, how it affects South African society. And then a little bit later on in this vodcast, we will be joined by Solofelo Moeng, who is a youth activist, who's going to be talking to us about how young people are affected by spatial inequality. This is a chance for you, the viewer, to see what political parties are saying in the run-up to the election about key issues in South African society, especially those that are affecting the youth. Youth Capital has been doing this series in the run-up to May 29th in the hope that political parties will better articulate what their offering is to young people. We love your views. We love your interactions as well. Please do hit us up on social media. You can reach out to me directly at Nicolaas Bauer on x.com. Otherwise, you can reach out on Youth Capital's social media platforms as well. Those of you that have joined the webinar, you can also post your questions on the chat feature. Standing by in the background is Clotilda Angelucci. She's going to be running things for us. And we, of course, appreciate her for making sure that the ship is sailing forward. So before I hand over to Professor Edgar Pieterse, I need to introduce to you our panelists for the day. Zwelo Masilela is the Treasurer General of the ANC Youth League. He, of course, is joining us to give us a view of the governing party. We're joined by the Deputy Mayor of Cape Town, Eddie Andrews. He's going to be representing the Democratic Alliance. Ponzo Hlongwane is part of the Economic Freedom Fighters Student Command. He's going to be joining us to see what the Red Berets have to say about spatial inequality. And then, of course, Sanele Zondo of the Inkatha Freedom Party Youth Brigade. He's going to be bringing his thoughts live from Cape Town. Eddie Mfulwane is a National Executive Committee member of the Pan-African Congress. He joins us as well. And, of course, also someone that needs really no introduction in the civil society space. That is an independent candidate in the form of Zaki Ahmed. He joins us as well. But without further ado, time is, of course, of the essence. Professor Edgar Pieterse, thank you very much for offering your insights on something that you've really researched in depth. Maybe let's start out with a very, very simple question for you. What is spatial inequality and how does it affect South Africa, Prof?
Thank you, Nick. It's wonderful to be here and very exciting to finally feel that I'm part of the fervor leading up to our next elections. So in very simple terms, we think of spatial inequality as the expression of another form of inequality, which we call multidimensional inequality in very particular geographical areas. So what is multidimensional inequality? When we think of it, inequality takes the form of income, it takes the form of wealth, it takes the form of access to basic social services like education and health, but it also can be expressed in how much access or how much are you prevented from getting access to basic infrastructural services. And the most sort of less concrete aspect of it is political inequality, whether you have voice or not. So when we think of these different forms of inequality, they tend to aggregate in very particular ways in certain geographical areas, such as townships or parts of rural South Africa, or any kind of periphery from where the mainstream economy is based. Now, to make it very concrete, when we think of how it manifests, is that some people, if they are born in a township, they're young, they will really face insurmountable obstacles to just live, let alone thrive. But we know that if you're born on the right side of the rail track, so to speak, you are in many ways enabled to succeed. And this really is the lasting legacy of spatial inequality. I hope that helps.
It certainly does, Prof. But I mean, really to drive this point home, if anything, is this not what apartheid was at its essence, spatial inequality? They tried to introduce a euphemistic term when apartheid was first founded, if you will, about separate development. You, people of a different hue, a darker hue over there, us over here. I mean, that really does drive the point home. Spatial inequality. This area over here is going to partake in the resources, be given opportunity to thrive and develop, while you over there will be able to come and serve this area here, but you are not going to take part in the goodies that we are going to be giving this sector of society. You need to sort yourself out over there, like you said, on the other side of the so-called railway tracks.
Indeed. And I mean, what listeners need to appreciate is that in some ways, the imagination of racial superiority, and by extension, the means to achieve that, which was racial inequality, was literally crystallized in concrete, right? This is why the legacy is so enduring, because to give expression to that fantasy of racial division, laws were passed to make sure that investments in material things like roads, houses, other forms of infrastructure happened in certain areas and not in others. And the problem with infrastructure is when you make that investment, it lasts a very, very long time. So when you pour concrete for a bridge or for a road, you're talking about a 40, 50, 60-year investment. And by its converse, if you don't make that investment, you have an expensive deficit to catch up on. And this is what we're wrestling with in the post-94 era, is that 60, and some would argue 350 years of materialized inequality, sort of anchored by infrastructure, that deficit to attend to that has been very, very difficult to shift. And what we've seen is various attempts by the post-94 regime to do that, but they've more or less had the opposite effect. And that is because what we're talking about is not just infrastructure, but also land and the value associated with different kinds of land. And this is why it is so difficult to shift this problem.
Try and break this down for us, though, Prof, because there is the usual fallback for people that don't want to grapple with this very real legacy of spatial apartheid to say, come on now, it's 30 years down the line. Can we not move on from apartheid? It's very, very difficult to move on from apartheid when in some ways the blueprint that made apartheid really so successful remains in place.
I'll give you three very quick examples. One, if we look at land markets. So what we've seen since 94 is that the value of property in middle class or former white areas has gone up exponentially, but the value in township areas remains stagnant for the first 20 years, and it has only started to climb up in the last decade or so. And some people make a big deal because it is growing at a slightly faster rate than the value of property in middle class areas in the last 5 years or so. But because of the gap between the two, it is actually inconsequential. So that shows you the, if you will, legacy effect, the cumulative effect of having an asset that grows over time. Secondly, if we look at mobility or transport, we've thrown an enormous amount of money at trying to fix public transport in South Africa since 94. But the biggest obstacle we know for young people to find work is the cost of transport and the inconvenience of transport. And even if you have a job, holding on to that job is very difficult because of our dysfunctional public transport system. Now that in turn, the reason why it's so hard to fix apart from incompetence in public sector institutions is also because it is a very expensive ticket item. And so to fix that, given the depth of the lack of investment over generations, is a big ask. The third example that I will give you is the very solution that was introduced to reverse this, which was public housing. So the imagination was in 94, let's give all poor South Africans a free house where they've got a title deed so that the place where the house is built, they get access to land through that investment. We've processed around close to 4 million of these subsidies since 94. The current backlog is greater than it was in 94 at about 3.2 million at the moment. But the more insidious problem with this, which is a direct result of spatial inequality, is that the subsidy amount had to cover the cost of the land and the top structure and the connective infrastructure. And what this meant was the only way you could make that work in terms of the RDP housing model was to buy the cheapest possible land. And that meant that poor people, working class people, were forced to the edges of our cities and towns and rural areas over the last 30 years. And that, in fact, depreciated the value of the asset that the state was trying to transfer, while the assets that the existing middle class areas had were appreciating in value dramatically. And so income inequality, wealth inequality, asset inequality all actually grew further apart over the last 30 years. So hopefully those three examples make it much more practical.
Certainly does. It gives a proper practical meaning to what spatial inequality does to South Africa 30 years into our democracy. Before I hand on over to our political parties for their opening statements on how they want to deal with spatial inequality, let's get real, Professor Pieterse. This is not an easy fix item. It's not a question of let's change the policy and then next week, Tuesday, we don't have spatial inequality. To overcome this enduring legacy is going to need whoever is leading us into the next 5 years, the next 10 years, the next couple of decades, sustained effort.
Absolutely. Look, there is no quick fix, but I think there are a couple of bold things that can be done. And at least a deposit can be put down by the political parties that there's a commitment to do that. One very practical thing, all private real estate investments must have a minimum amount of inclusionary housing. This is standard practice in most parts of the world, and why we've just not been able to pass the legislation and have the regulatory framework to get that to come to pass is absolutely beyond me. Secondly, we've got to understand the large proportion of urban dwellers who are the most marginal live in informal settlements. Our attitude to informal settlements has at best been ambivalent. Let's invest in upgrading those areas and improving the quality of health and especially safety and security in those areas. That's a short-term thing that you can do as a reprioritization of investment. Thirdly, let's acknowledge that the current model of the public housing program has failed. It's not working for anyone really, except maybe for some gangsters who are able to buy up a bunch of properties and then trade from there. So what is the alternative to address the housing crisis in South Africa? The alternative has to be about focusing on creating an enabling environment for jobs, safe public spaces, and empowering households to improve the quality of their life within their households. So you've got to reprioritize. And this is what has worked in Latin America, it's worked in Southeast Asia. But for some of the other reason, we are obsessed with the idea that the house is the starting point, whereas what we know from other places is economic investment, safe public space, and access to urban opportunities. That's where you start. And then you support households to improve their living environment incrementally.
It certainly isn't a chicken versus egg debate. It's clearly shown through years and years of research, and of course also the experience of places that you just mentioned, like South America and Southeast Asia. You need to get the absolute basics right about making an area safer, and of course also providing economic opportunities to the areas that you wish to grow. If you've just joined us, you're on the Yes or No vodcast with myself, Nicholas Barr, brought to you by Youth Capital. A very thought-provoking introduction from Professor Edgar Pieterse from the University of Cape Town, talking to us about the legacy of spatial apartheid. That's what we're talking about. We're cutting to the heart of youth issues on this podcast. It's a part of Youth Capital's efforts to try and ensure that the new government post the 2024 election continues with the Youth Employment Service that has basically provided a first-time employment opportunity to thousands of South Africa's youth. I've already introduced all of our panelists today. They've only got 2 minutes when I introduce them now to give their policies on spatial inequality and what their party will do should they be elected to government after the May 29th election to overcome the legacy of spatial apartheid. We want to hear from you, the viewers, as well. Remember, the chat line is open. You can also reach out to us on social media. at Niklaus Bauer's my X account, and then of course also Youth Capital social media platforms as well. To kick us off, we are going to go in order of representation in the National Assembly, in Parliament. We have the ANC Youth League's Zwelo Masilela. Mr. Masilela, if you could please put on your camera and join us. Are you there? All right, we see an ANC Youth League, or at least an ANC flag, on the screen right now. Mr. Masilela, are you there?
Yes, I'm there. I'm not. I tried to. Yes, I'm here.
Lovely to see your face, Mr. Masilela. Thank you very much. Your 2 minutes starts now. What is the ANC's approach to overcoming the legacy of spatial apartheid? Please go ahead.
Thank you very much. And I think greetings to all political parties and representatives here. And I think thanks for the opportunity. I think for me, we need to start from the beginning to appreciate the fact that the South African question is different from any other former colonized country, because the people who would have colonized South Africa lived within South Africa. They did not just colonize South Africa. Now, even the policies thereof, including spatial planning at the time, was deliberate to exclude the majority of our people and put them in the outer edges of the economy and the cities. Now, as a result, when you respond to such, it can't be just a global phenomenon as you were to respond to. Hence, you raise the issue of between what comes first, between chicken and the egg. Hence, the over-investment by the ANC government on distributing houses, because our people were highly disadvantaged. There was a huge lack of a human settlement, as it were, in terms of housing, particularly even in the rural areas, even in the urban areas and so forth. But also, what is important that has been done by the ANC government and will continue to do is to expand on its infrastructure project, because spatial planning attached to it is infrastructure, because you need to ensure that people are connected to transport network, people are able to be connected to their workplaces closer, there's internet connectivity, and
15 seconds, Mr. Masilela, please finish off.
Yes, and they are able to have access to land. One of the greatest challenges now is access to land, and especially in the urban areas. And one of the things that the ANC must be able and will be able to intensify is to avail land in urban areas for middle income earners and low income and entry-level income people. Already that process is there for government to mitigate even people who are employed but do not qualify for bonds. They could be able to be given access to land to build, or to access buying property and all of that. That must be intensified, and we believe that if that could be...
Thank you, Mr. Masilela. I'm going to have to cut you short there. You've already had over 2 minutes. I do apologize, but we need to bring in our next panelist, Democratic Alliance's Eddie Andrews. You're grappling with these issues on a day-to-day basis as the Deputy Mayor of Cape Town. Your 2 minutes starts now. The DA's approach to overcoming spatial inequality.
Nicholas, absolutely. I think we recognize that about 7 out of 10 people in our country cannot find work. Professor Arendse perfectly articulated the contextual realities that we currently face. So government needs to look at the relaxing labor relations that are disincentivizing international companies from entering South Africa and ensuring that South Africa can absorb these companies and stimulate employment in the country. The shared future should not be only resourced by the public sector, but there needs to be private sector partnerships. And I think that is an important point that we would like to make. And also, furthermore, by introducing a youth unemployment opportunity certificate, we aim to make it significantly easier for people aged between 18 and 35 years to find a job. Just in the Western Cape, we've seen with the Professor Arons just spoke about access to transport to get to the job opportunity. We're offering free passes to every single job seeker in the Western Cape to get to that interview and hopefully to get that appointment. And so this certificate will be valid for 2 years and will be implemented to give unemployed people who have not been employed for a period of 12 months or longer the right to exempt themselves from the sectorial wage agreements. I think that's a very important point that we would like to make. So the overall of these restrictive regulations is of utmost importance as well. We need to also promote the principle of multiracialism, fostering an environment where diversity thrives. That is important. And a commitment to no new taxes. So people are already heavily overburdened by existing taxes. So rather to extract more out of the approximately 5.5 million people that is keeping SA's coffers afloat, we need to broaden the pool of taxpayers. But I think the issue of safe access and safe spaces and land and how do we sweat the asset, we've clearly demonstrated that where we dispose of properties in the Western Cape, in the city of Cape Town, to 10% of the market value. So the private sector, our social partners,
Mr. Andrews, 30 seconds left.
Hate those opportunities and further employ. And so when we have the whole of society approach, we most certainly will be able to sustainably respond to enabling that environment for the economy to grow. And lastly, Nicholas, the capital investment needs to be emphasized again. We need to invest in capital infrastructure. We can't grow the economy if we don't have the right capacity. And we need to have that policy certainty. We need to have our right frameworks in place. So the certainty also extends to the private sector because they know exactly where the public sector, in which direction we are heading. And even if we look at all of those facets, we're able to move.
Mr. Andrews, I apologize. We'll get another bite at the cherry when we have our youth activist, Cholofelo Mweng. Your 2 minutes is run over slightly. Let's bring in next. Unfortunately, I'm seeing here that we haven't been joined by the Economic Freedom Fighters representative, Poncho Hlongwane. We will continue trying to get a hold of him. But let's press ahead, shall we? The next party that's represented today in order of representation in the National Assembly, the Inkatha Freedom Party's Youth Brigade President, Sanele Zondo. He is joining us live on the line from Cape Town, Parliament, by the looks of it. So what does the IFP say when it comes to overcoming the legacy of spatial apartheid, Mr. Zondo? Your 2 minutes starts now.
Thanks. As the IFP, we have a concrete plan that we present a clear and actionable plan to address the various crises affecting our youth, especially the vulnerable. The IFP believes that South Africa will not improve the lives of its current generation, but also pave the way for a brighter future for generations to come. IFP seeks to create a more equitable and prosperous future for South African youth and will address the spatial inequality and impact through the community development, education reform, create jobs by attracting more investors to invest in South Africa, by creating a stable government and a trustworthy government in South Africa. Also by social support system in those who need to have social support in terms of social grants and so forth. So the IFP had a concrete plan and we are ready to be in government and we are ready to implement policies that will take South Africa forward.
All right, short and to the point there, Mr. Zondo. Thank you very much for your thoughts there. While we continue to try and get a hold of Poncho Hlongwane, let's move along to our next panelist, the Pan-African Congress, NEC member Eddie Mfulwane. Mr. Mfulwane, please, could you join us? Eddie Mfulwane, can you hear me?
Yes, thank you very much. My humblest apologies. I was indicating to you that I'm traveling.
Please go right ahead. Your 2 minutes starts now. How would the PAC overcome spatial inequality then?
Thank you very much. Let me start by greeting everyone and the leadership that is there from various political parties, yourselves, Prof. Let me start by saying that because just we are still doing introductions, I'll start by saying South Africa is like a worker that is being exploited and hopes that with trying to change the plan with that same salary that is from the exploitation, the problems can be resolved. We know what the problem is, the problem is the dispossession of the land. When we're talking about land, I hear quite a number of speakers from time to time. When we talk about land, people are talking about old buildings that they've disposed, that they've given to the people who are people in Western Cape. Others are speaking about middle income earners who are receiving particular assistance from the state to acquire land. But one thing that people are not getting to is that when we're talking about the land, we are talking about economics. The unlocking of the economy, the full control of the means of production. Once we are in control of our diamond capacity, the gold capacity, the coal capacity that we are in control, that we are God given, we will be able to resolve all these problems. All these problems that South Africans are facing, from unemployment, landlessness, lack of electricity, it is because the riches of our land are still in the hands of those who came here in the continent with sinister motives. The people who are here, I hear Prof is saying to us that South Africa is under some special type of inequality situation. You know, I'm not convinced. So one of the greatest problems we have as South Africans is that we over conceptualize our problems. When people steal, we say state capture. Thugs go and steal, and then we want to bring special English and say there's some state capture. Same here. We are saying we've got some special type of colonization, as if our colonization is different from the ones that is happening across Africa. South Africa, yes, we acknowledge it is one of the longest colonized countries in the continent. Therefore, the impact of colonization will affect it differently from others. However, what the people who came here to colonize us was here to do was not for land space and all these other things that people are talking about, was for survival. With survival came greed. Hence, there are capitalistic tendencies that they are still here today. We still find the same people.
Mr. Mfulwane, your final point, please.
My final point is that without the land, we will continue to change from one pillar to the other, changing economic policies. We are not going to go anywhere 30 years from today. Thank you very much.
Hey, and Mfulwane, please don't leave the call as of yet. You are going to be asked a question by Tsholofelo Moeng, our youth activist joining us today. All right, Zaki Ahmed, you're an independent candidate. Interesting inclusion in this election, 2024, not you specifically, but the overall inclusion of independent candidates. Remains to be seen whether or not that's going to be a game changer. But let's cut to the heart of the matter, shall we? You've worked very long in the civil society sector. If you're elected as a member of parliament, what are your policies when it comes to overcoming the legacy of spatial apartheid? Sorry, Zaki, you're just on mute. If you could please unmute yourself. All right,
morning.
Please go right ahead. Your morning starts now.
Morning, everyone. Nicholas, you welcome Zwelo Masilela, saying he has a lovely face. You didn't do that to any of the others of us.
What a massive oversight. Your face terrible. Every single other panelist that's joined us.
Beautiful.
Thank you very much. Perhaps I want to start by explaining what is happening to some young people in our country because of spatial injustice. Kanyo Manchi, who is a leader in the youth of my campaign and also in the Disability Activist Forum, is in a wheelchair. And he cannot travel to look for employment or, in fact, to just get out of Makaza in Khayelitsha. He's a young person who is absolutely brilliant, capable of being a member of parliament, and yet he himself struggles to get to the toilet in his own home. So the absolute problem that we're all facing is that the injustice affects the most marginalized people in our country. Spatial injustice condemns people to death. In informal settlements, there's a young man called Musa Pani who suffers from autism, and he lives in RR settlement. Flooded, when he's only comfortable on the ground. When floods happen in the informal settlements, he cannot. He screams, he becomes disoriented and so on. He has to travel from Khayelitsha to Hout Bay to the nearest school for children who are autistic. So just if we look at the most vulnerable people in our society, most vulnerable working class people, the impact of spatial injustice is terrible. And the critical questions that I would address, let me make clear, there's no ways I'm going to be able to be, I don't want to be part of the government. My job will be oversight. So let me speak about what is necessary for me to do in Parliament. I want to serve on the Standing Committee on Public Accounts. I want to see that municipalities spend their money on properly upgrading informal settlements. If they're not, then our duty is, as part of movements, to put the pressure on people, including the City of Cape Town, the City of Johannesburg, and elsewhere. The second question I want to address is the incredible impact on high property prices on rent for young people and young working class and middle class families. In the City of Cape Town, sorry, I can't hear you, Nicholas.
Final point, I do apologize, Zaki, your time is up. Please give me your final point.
Final point is that we have to ensure that the Spatial and Land Use Management Act is brought into operation and the private sector is brought under control properly.
Thank you very much for that, Zaki Ahmed. If you've just joined us, yes or no, brought to you by Youth Capital, hosted by myself, Nicholas Bauer. We're looking at spatial inequality, its effect on the youth 30 years after the end of apartheid. Now a chance for us to engage with our youth activist, Tolofelo Moeng. Tolofelo, thank you very much for your time this morning. Maybe just give us a brief background. I mean, what is it like for you as a young person in South Africa in 2024? Where are you trying to exist as a young person in the new South Africa?
Thank you so much for having me. I'd like to greet all the panelists and those who are joining us. My name is Tolofelo Moeng. How is it like being a young person in South Africa? It feels like I can't even be myself or dare to dream or even want to grow up, because everywhere you try to do better, the doors keep on getting shut to your face. So it's not even hard being a young person in South Africa. It's close to impossible. Yes.
Okay, so Tolofelo, let's bring you in here. You have some anecdotes about how you've experienced spatial inequality. And our panelists, just to remind you of the format and running order, you're going to have 1 minute to respond to Tolofelo Moeng. She's going to be asking you, why should young people vote for you, after she offers an anecdote about life as a young person. So please do stand by. I'm going to bring you on. Tolofelo, what is your first anecdote?
My first one is a personal story. I'd like to start with a personal story. I'm a Golden Care recipient, yet NSFAS refuses to fund me because it keeps on picking up my absent father's payslip. My parents divorced in 2000, back in typewriters. NSFAS is a virtual ghost that doesn't assist decisively with queries. I'm not the only one struggling. Young people are left to themselves and their applications not adequately administered. Students getting evicted by landlords, going hungry for months, and even getting deregistered. Why should young people vote for you?
That's the first question for Zwelo Masilela. Zwelo, were you listening to that? Why should young people vote for the ANC?
The youth of this country must continue to vote for the ANC. And we believe that interventions such as the NSFAS, which of course, as stated, has a plethora of challenges. And we believe that we are moving towards correcting the corruption, because at the center of NSFAS and the challenges is corruption, which enables people to do all the mess that is at NSFAS. And it's an administrative corruption. Hence, the Youth League would have welcomed the dissolution of the board, because we believe that the board failed in presiding over the corrective measures that would have dealt with the issues that relate to corruption. So we believe that the end goal should be free higher education for all poor South Africans and the youth of this country. That is the end goal that the ANC ought to move towards. But NSFAS continues to be an intervention, and we believe that the intervention of NSFAS would have enabled many, many young people to get access to education and be graduates and join the employment force and the entire labor force and the economy as such. So it continues to be an intervention, and we believe that it should be improved. Like any other intervention, it has administrative mishaps, and we believe that with decisive interventions, we can be able to have a proper leadership at the level of NSFAS and to administer
20
a
seconds,
proper
Mr. Masilela, 20 seconds.
facilitation of making sure that the scheme continues to serve young people and the youth of this country properly. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Mr. Masilela. I do appreciate it. Eddie Andrews, you're up next. But Solofela Moeng, what is your anecdote for Eddie Andrews?
Secondly, not everyone has the same 24 hours. The transport system is not reliable. In the Northwest, there are places where you can only get to by bus. Students need to wake up early to catch the first bus and often leaving class earlier to catch the last one. We spend most of our 24 hours commuting than actually investing in our dreams and aspirations. Why should young people vote for you?
Fellow young people should vote for the Democratic Alliance because we have incentivized private sector investment precisely in those communities where those individuals reside. And those individuals who reside, we call they are socially vulnerable. And so that is what happened. We have also, I just want to comment on the NSFAS in terms of the mismanagement of the NSFAS. And that is precisely the reason why you should vote for the Democratic Alliance, because we have a track record of good governance, and not just what we are saying, but of course what our colleagues at national government has been saying all along. We have formed strong partnerships with the private sector with our Jobs Connect program, where we are able to offer those job seekers free transport to get their opportunity, but also connect them, close the loop with an opportunity for them, and of course that opportunity be closer in their community as well. We have changed legislation in terms of our spatial framework where we can build more homes and have more private sector investment within those communities. We have allocated recently a development charges fund to waiver the development charges requirements for private sector investment in those communities, removing one more barrier and bringing that economic opportunity closer to the residential opportunity. Furthermore, we're looking at our social housing program, where we're bringing the social housing, a housing opportunity closer to the economic opportunity. And so, Lofila, that's exactly why you should vote for the Democratic Alliance for those reasons. Good track record, strong partnerships with the private sector, and creating an enabling environment to sustainably respond to your shared future.
Thank you very much for that, Eddie Andrews. Up next is the IFP Youth Brigade, Sanele Zondo. I'm going to bring you on in a moment or so, but Solofela Moeng, what's your anecdote for Mr. Zondo?
Mr. Zondo, most young people are forced to live hand to mouth with the current economy, without the necessary resources to do the planning or have aspirations to grow themselves, and no light at the end of that tunnel gleaming their way. Why should young people vote for you?
Sorry, can you repeat at the beginning? I didn't get clear at the beginning.
No problem, sir. I said, most young people are forced to live hand to mouth with the current economy, without the necessary resources to do the planning or have aspirations to grow themselves, and no light at the end of that tunnel gleaming their way. Why should young people vote for you?
Okay, thanks for the question. I think the IFP had a good track record in government. You go to KwaZulu-Natal, where the IFP have governed that province. Then, if you go and check that record, you'll see that when the IFP was in government in KwaZulu-Natal, the investors were coming in all the way to invest in the local in the economy, and IFP is still advocating for the local empowerment, local economic empowerment, whereby you find investors investing in local places whereby people will be able to go to work where they stay and in their homes. That is the basic of the IFP, to say when we get the chance to govern, we make sure that the funds and the coffers of the government are talking to the people. Secondly, when the IFP was in government before 1994 in KwaZulu-Natal, when the time for voting I'm being disturbed now. When the time of
Please go right ahead. You've got 20 seconds left.
the issue of land, the IFP is the only party that took out the state land back to the people through Ingonyama Trust land, of which most of the provinces now, they want that the Ingonyama Trust land to be taken to all the provinces so that the land from the state land to be transferred to the Ingonyama Trust so that people will own the land and have a close proximity on the land administration through their kings at their local level. So I think the IFP has a clear plan on what it's going to do with land. And as the IFP, you are advocating that when getting land, we must make sure that we keep that land working, not for just making shacks, not just invading land in order to have a residency, but we promote the agriculture.
Final point, please. Final point.
IFP promotes the agriculture, and even in our manifesto, we are saying that agriculture should be a compulsory subject in all the institutions so that everyone, when you get land, will be able to use land, utilize land in a productive way so that the country economy will pick up on that aspect.
Thank you, Mr. Zondo. Tolofele, your thoughts for our PAC representative, Eddie Mfulwane. Eddie, are you still with us? Okay, Eddie Mfulwane seems to have left the show. Zaki Ahmad is up next. Tolofele Moeng, what is your question for Zaki Ahmad?
Mr. Zaki, the climate has changed. Water is scarce across the country, and many communities don't have access to drinking water. Our most basic needs, even the ones linked to our survival, are not being met. Why should young people vote for you?
Tolofele, I was going to ask you a question about Ramatlabane and how you get from Ramatlabane if you were in Northwest to Mahikeng. So there's some questions I'd like to ask you as a young person to inform all of us, as opposed to us speaking to you. Truth is the first casualty, not in war, but in politics. So when you speak about climate justice, I think the disasters that you are going to face, the disasters that corporations have brought on us with climate justice, that is terrible, something terrible that's going to be visited on your generation and the generations to come. So water, as you say, is a huge problem, and there's several problems with water in our country. The first is the maladministration, mismanagement, and in fact, corruption in water. This is a critical problem that all of us face, particularly in the provinces rural provinces, Eastern Cape and Gauteng. And we can see what happened in Tshwane with what happened with illness in Tshwane. So the first is water resilience. First is maintenance of current dams and water plants and so on. The second is investing in more dams that are resilient. In the urban areas, we need to look at ways that purify water. Now, the water in infrastructure in the rural areas has not even been laid out in a proper manner. So the question of how we're going to use groundwater, how we're going to use dams and so on, these are things that I don't have the answer for, but I'm going to have to seek the answers from climate justice experts. It's important that we say to you what we don't know. And for me, the critical question is, I want to look at how the Department of Water and Sanitation spends its money, why the minister has to intervene constantly in municipalities to tell them to fix water. Here we have
final point,
increasingly...
Mr. Ahmad, final point. Unfortunately, your time is up.
I want to say this to young people. I'm 62 years old. I'll be 63 next year, March 21st. Why should you vote for me? Not because I'm only going to be a champion for you, but my work has to be to listen to you and to learn from you.
All right, thank you very much for that. Professor Edgar Pieterse, let me bring you back in here. I mean, I know you're not a political analyst, so I'm not going to put you on the spot here and say, well, what did you think of all those responses? But I do want to get an idea from you as someone that's an expert in this field. Do we have enough ideas on the table by the people that want to lead us? We certainly have enough, but I'm talking about the quality of those ideas. You don't need to point out who's right and who's wrong, but do you think that we're adequately grappling with this issue from a political point of view? Is this being taken serious enough by our political parties from what you heard today?
You are putting me on the spot here. No, to be honest, no. I mean, I didn't know you were going to ask this question, so just from the debate. But obviously, this is a very sort of stylized, brief, rapid-fire kind of session. So it's a little bit unfair to expect this to answer this very complicated question. I think that there's a lot of sort of misreading of the scale of the challenge. And I think some of the things that are on the table that are beginning to move in the direction of solutions are so small scale and particular, they're really marginal to the size of the problem. And so I think it's good that there's experimentation with things like, you know, the sort of the vouchers for work seekers and so forth. But even if we look at the question of land, right, and the point that was made was that it's not just land, but it's the mineral resources. Mining is 7% of our GDP. Agriculture is 2% of our GDP. So I think that there's often a misunderstanding of what is the fundamental nature of the contemporary South African economy. How does that relate to value sort of addition? And where does wealth actually reside so that you can have responses that is commensurate to the existing structure of the economy and not trapped, I think, in very particular kind of ideological tropes that frames a problem around what the economy looked like 100 years ago. I mean, that is just sort of off the top of my head. So I'm, you know, haven't really felt that there's enough traction or enough understanding or ideas around responding at the level of the scale of the challenge that we face without, you know, being too precise.
Certainly. And thank you very much for that indulgence. I didn't mean to put you on the spot. It's just always so very, very handy to have someone that is dealing with the heart of the matter from a research point of view. It's easy to wax lyrical about what political parties would do, but it's difficult as the layman, as it were, to discern whether or not that is actually a sustainable and meaningful solution. If you've just joined us, we are talking about spatial inequality on this vodcast brought to you by Youth Capital. I'm Nicholas Bauer. We've been joined by the ANC, the DA, unfortunately the EFF not connecting with us today. And of course, also the PAC, IFP, and Zaki Ahmed, independent candidate. We've heard from our young youth activist, Solofelo Moeng, and the parties have had a chance to put forward why they believe young people should vote for them. We've got a couple of questions on the Q&A line that we'll get to now. Today, South Africa is the worst situation for a young person. Worse than the poorest and war-ravaged countries out there. My question is to the parties that represent their hopes and aspirations of getting elected. With the knowledge of the current reality, with its causes and effects, what is the biggest challenge that you face in giving young people one voice? A very roundabout way of asking, with 10 million people in a hopeless situation, is it impossible to force the government to delivering what is promised in the Constitution with various legislation giving voice to what is aspired to in the Constitution? Maybe, let me paraphrase that, Zwelo Masilela. Do you think that it's possible for the ANC to deliver on its promises, to deliver a better life for young people? And how would the ANC do it differently than what they've done in the past 30 years, Mr. Masilela?
Thank you very much. I think the ANC has improved the lives of South Africans, particularly the majority, the Black people. Stats SA does indicate that the life of an average South African has greatly improved. Life expectancy has improved and all of that. Now, it is better to live in South Africa than it was 30 years ago for a South African. There are more opportunities for every South African, particularly the majority Black people and the youths. And notwithstanding all of that, there are challenges still confronting this country. And we believe that given the track record of the ANC in improving the lives of our people in this country, it should be again given an opportunity to continue doing and improving the lives of our people, because it's the only political party that has a track record of improving the lives of our people. It has not been on the critical front, but it has been on the delivering front of the challenges of this country. And we believe that
Final point,
with the
Mr.
lessons learned
Masilela.
over the years, we can be able to resolve the challenges of the country going forward, as we would have done in the past 8 years.
Thank you very much for that. Treasurer General of the ANC Youth League, Zweli Masilela. The ANC wants another bite at the
Mr. Nicholas, you are muted.
Thank you very much, Mr. Moeng. I do appreciate it. Gosh, even technical issues catching up with an old hand like myself. But let me not stop my own role. Question for Eddie Andrews. You heard the ANC Youth League Treasurer General, Mr. Masilela, saying that the ANC wants another bite at the cherry. We've got a viewer in Sturkspruit in the Eastern Cape. They ask a very, very, very important question. University graduates that are unemployed, how would the DA address that?
Thank you, Nicholas. Am I audible?
Yes, go right ahead.
Okay. So, Nicholas, so what we have an internship program where we've spoken about experience, where we've waived that particular requirement. We are saying that requirement is a barrier for individuals who have the necessary skills, but when they apply, they are asked for the experience that they've gained, but they've just graduated. And so we argue that they should be exempt. And I think having them in the public sector, gaining the necessary experience, then of course would be ensuring that they'll be a lot more employable in this space. I think again, to reflect on the private sector partnerships, to have those Job Connect programs where we have access to market and access to opportunities, upskilling the youth in those areas right where they reside would be a step in the right direction. And so that's how we think we should be proceeding. We also agree that the easiest option available to youth would be on the 29th of May to actually go out and vote. Look at what has happened in the past 30 years, the mismanagement of our resources, to go out and vote and be part of the conversation and not just stand idly and not participate, but be an active participant and make your voice heard.
Eddie Andrews, thank you very much for that. Do appreciate it. Up next, we've got a question on new economic growth points, new industries, specifically the legalization of hemp and related plants. Sanele Zondo of the IFP. Hemp and related plants. Do you think that the legalization and development of that industry can manifest in opportunities for young people? Sanele Zondo?
Yes, I think we need to encourage that kind of initiatives, because I think as the IFP, we believe that agriculture is one of the fundamental sector that to lift up our economy. So any initiative that seeks to improve the economy or via agriculture need to be encouraged and be supported by the government, so that will means that all the land that is available be audited, so that we see which land can be used to plow what, and encourage people to do so in that land. Because if you can go to ocean, near ocean where there is a most wetland, and audit there what is the soil can produce, and invest more on that, I think it will help the government, in fact, to penetrate on that sector of agriculture, because agriculture is one of the fundamental aspects in order to uplift the economy of this country. And as we can look right now, the most land in South Africa is used for farming and agriculture. And if we can tap into that space, as any race, black or white, we come together and work land through agriculture, we can thrive. So I believe that agriculture is the way of life. And if we can concentrate on that, put more support to it, we can strive as the country in terms of economy.
All right, IFP Youth Brigade Chairperson Sanele Zondo there. Zaki, you are still on the line. Zaki Ahmed, independent candidate for the National Assembly. Question specific to you. You've centered your campaign on holding government to account. You don't want to join government, you say. You don't want to become a representative of the people in the executive. But a young person contacting us from Roodepoort in Johannesburg wants to know, how will you as an independent candidate work with young people to ensure that the money government has, the budget, is spent properly and benefits the young people of South Africa? You just unmute yourself, please, Zaki.
Hi. What I'd like to say is, if you go onto my website, I sign a contract with most people who are going to vote for me. And that means that I hold myself accountable. I can be disciplined, I can be recalled, and so on. What I'm committed to doing is two things: reclaim Parliament to fix the state. Reclaiming Parliament means doing what the first Parliament did, and that is invite communities, invite people in to speak to them. Secondly, I want to go further than that. Every MP on this program knows that you get constituencies, constituency allowances up to 100,000 Rand a month in order to do constituency work. No one that I know does proper constituency work. So I want to work with Youth in Action, which is the group that is part of my campaign. I want to work with them on mental health and substance use disorder, particularly alcohol. But the critical thing is we have to fix the state. No jobs will be created unless every one of us focus our attention on how money is spent. I've worked for 7 years on PRASA, and state capture there has killed jobs. Eskom has killed jobs. And our job as MPs will be to work to listen to people on how to best fix things, but also to listen to progressive experts. Thanks, Nicholas.
Zaki Ahmed there joining us. What a day. Another successful vodcast. The Yes or No series brought to you by Youth Capital. Quick thank you to all of our panelists. Of course, the ANC Youth League Treasurer General Zweli Masilela, Deputy Mayor of Cape Town, Eddie Andrews, representing the Democratic Alliance, Sanele Zondo, the IFP Youth Brigade President. We also were joined by the PAC's Eddie Mfulwane, an NEC member. He's no longer with us. And of course, Zaki Ahmed, independent candidate. Edgar Petersen, this debate would not have been the same without you. Very briefly, where can we follow your work? Where can we look into what spatial inequality means from a facts and figures point of view?
Thank you. AfricanCenterForCities.net, and my X hashtag, I'm so impressed with myself, I got that right, is at Edgar Petersen. Thank you.
Certainly. I'm still getting confused between Twitter and X myself, saving Elon Musk's blushes. Solofelo Moeng, also, this would not have been possible without the great insight that you provided. Solofelo Moeng is a youth activist that joined us. Thank you very much, and I wish you the very, very best for the future. Don't forget, everybody, 15th of May is when we have our final discussion when it comes to this series brought to you by Youth Capital. I'm Nicolaas Bauer. I've really enjoyed engaging with you today. And join us for that final conversation, also happening at 9:30 on the 15th of May. We're going to be having a look at the critical issues that are affecting South Africa's youth in the run-up to May 29th. And it has been an absolute pleasure today. Remember that you can reach out to us on our social media. That is Youth Capital. This series, of course, is an attempt to try and ensure that the presidential employment stimulus continues post the 2024 election. After we elect new leaders, they need to continue with this initiative that has brought a first-time work opportunity to thousands of young South Africans. Research is extremely clear in the regard that once a young person gets a foot in the door with that first work opportunity, their ability, their employability, and ability to find a job just increases exponentially. You can follow this debate on Youth Capital's social media platforms as well as their website. I'm Nicolaas Bauer. It's been a great pleasure joining you for the past hour. And don't forget to sign up for our next webinar on the 15th of May.